I wanted to show you this big statement ring, but I love wearing this. It's my orbital ring, and it is rather large, but I suppose you could make it smaller. It's two circles, but it's very flush to the hand, especially if you don't make it for the last finger. And actually it sits quite flat, depending on the amount of stones or little chips or beads you're going to put onto it. This is a bit of sea glass, this is a bit more raised. But obviously you're not going to use it, you're not going to wear it rather while you're doing the housework. So wear this ring when you want to sit on the sofa and just chill. So it comes from my book, How to Make Hammered Wire Jewellery. And so if you've got this book, you'll know it already. And I love making these sort of compacted wire bases. And it's all there. I think I wrote this book in about 2015, but it's my favourite book because there's lots of hammering in it, and the projects are all fun to do and very easy to do. So I'm using copper wire. I've got 0.8, but you can use 1 mil. It's really dependent on how chunky you want everything to be. So any wire will actually do. And you're first of all going to make the ring shank. So I've done that by wrapping around the ring mandrel to a size smaller than my actual ring size, because I'll stretch it by hammering it. And then I'm gripping all those coils together, but you see, when I've cut it off the spool, I've left quite a long projecting end. And so that's connected now, connected all those coils together. That's going to be the shank. And then I use this long projecting end of wire, which is about 7 inches, something like that, to wrap all the way round. I bring it quite tight, but I'm not doing it neatly. It doesn't have to be perfectly neat. Now, I've done this ring before in my tutorials just as a plain ring, and it's always very, very effective as a very solid shank for any ring to wire a bead onto. So, and the more wire you use, the chunkier it's going to be. So you can determine that, and it'll also depend on the actual size of ring finger that you're making it for. So use up all the wire and just keep wrapping it round. Try not to leave any gaps, because otherwise when you hammer it, you'll end up with little areas that have holes in it. It's not a bad thing, it's just a different look. So there we are, it's all bound together. And it's obviously smaller than my actual ring size. So now I put it back onto my ring mandrel, and I'm going to hammer it on there to compact all those wires into one. So it's going to compress everything into one solid mass of wire, which is, it's my way of, because I'm not soldering anything, it's my way of, getting everything in one lump, like if I was to solder the shank and make it meet. Now that becomes one solid piece. So there's an instant ring anyway. So you can do that. Sometimes you could do that with two mixtures of wires, different one for the wrapping wire. So now the next thing is the front of my ring. I'm just using the hammerhead to create the larger disc of my ring, but you can use, any cylindrical mandrel you have to hand. It depends on the size of that diameter that you're looking for, and you need two. So you need the outer and the inner. So you make one for the outer and a smaller one for the inner. So you can just wrap this around, a magic marker pen or a glue stick or anything you want depending on the sizes. And then I'm going to speed this up because you do exactly what I've just done for the ring. And the more wire you use, the chunkier, as I said, these pieces will be. I haven't done it too chunky because for the demo purposes of this demo, I don't want you to have to sit through, too much. So I'm just I'm just making sure again that I haven't lost the shape, and then I'll do the smaller one in exactly the same way. I'm binding and binding and binding that sort of those coils that I first made. So, you know, a child could do this. You could do this with your grandchildren or your children. It's a really fun project to do together. So there's all the bindings, and the smaller one I've actually left a little stem of wire, and then the next thing I'm doing is hammering them flat this time, flat on my steel block. So that's compressing them and compacting the wires, but flat down, instead of the one I did for my shank, which was on the ring mandrel. You see how flat and compact that is, and that's really solid now. So this is the smaller one for the inside, and as you see, I have left a bit of wire projecting because I'm going to use that to connect to the other bigger circle. So you can put all your connecting wires on at this point and then connect it, but I've just left one and then I'll connect. So there's really, you know, no right way or wrong way to do this. Right, so the next thing I'm going to do is use that length of wire, find the center and just leave a gap, and that will be connected onto the bigger outside orbital ring. Cut off any excess. So now at least it's connected, but I want to put a bit, a few more connectors as well. So hammer that down so it's also compacted, and then get some more of your 0.8 wire to do 3 or 4 more connection joins. Really doesn't matter, as long as it feels sturdy. You might actually get away with just 2. So anyway, the great thing about connecting it doesn't matter how messy it is, because the whole thing has been bound anyway, and it's all, once you hammer it down, it'll hide all that binding, because you hammer it flat anyway. So it just needs a couple of bindings around, a bit of flattening, and then once it's on, you can hammer it again, and then you do another binding. And every time you put your binding on, just give it a nice good flattening, because it will move otherwise. So spend a bit of time getting it in the center. So I'm going to put one more binding. And again, the good thing about wire, it is so flexible. So, there's a lot of, give and stretch and elasticity, especially in copper. So I'm not too worried that it's not too central. And to be honest, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm doing it very fast and not really spending as much time as I would normally. But I just want to show you the technique. And if you wanted to make it, I don't know, less rustic, of course you can. So there we are. I feel that is bound in. So now I'm just going to use my hammer at the end to flatten everything, make sure it's central, and compress it all into one solid, and it'll feel like it's not going to budge or move. And you see I've got a little bit of give there if I wanted to manipulate it further. Right, so there's your framework and structure for the front. The next thing is to use 0.4 mil. So this is very fine binding wire, and I'm just cutting a length of that. And I'm going to just bind a sort of like weave a grid. This is not going to be neat in any way. It's just that I want a base for my gemstones chips to sit on. I mean, you might choose just to put one big bead in the center, in which case you just wire in one big bead. But I just thought it would be a nice thing to show you how to use up gemstone chips, because often, you know, when we make necklaces or jewellery, you're left with a few, and sometimes you just think, I've got all those little chips lying around, what do I do with them? And this is a great way of using them up. You can make this as a sort of mixed gemstone ring. So there we are. I've just bound it very roughly. You won't see that base. It just prevents the little chips from falling through. So now just pick up any gemstone beads you have to hand. As I said, you could have just used one or two, but I'm going to use a selection. And just place them where your base, in between that sort of middle circle is, and just sew them in with the 0.4 wire. So this is, again, every time you do it, it's pretty random. It's so dependent on what you want to put at the center of your ring. And just fill up that center point. So it's going to be your focal bit of your ring. And there you've got nice little gaps in, you know, the hammered wire that you can find to thread the weaving wire through, which anchors it really well. So I think I'm just about done, although I can see a bit of a gap there, a bit of daylight. I don't really want any daylight. So let's bring the wire to the point where, you see there's the gap, the tiny gap there. So I could do with one more chip to fill that gap. So let's just find one more and thread that on, and that fills the gap, and then just finish that off. So just weave it in, and if you've got leftover weaving wire like I have, you can always bring it around. I mean, you can just finish off at that point, but what I'm doing, it's a bit like a button. I'm going around and around just under those gemstone beads. I mean, they're all very organic shapes, and they're odd shapes, but this will sort of hold them all together, so they won't wobble around, and it fixes them a bit more firmly as a sort of cluster. And you could also, if you wanted to, I'll just show you one more thing. If you wanted to finish with, you could actually put a setting around whatever you put onto the center or area of your ring. So by doing that, you can make a little spiral, because this sort of will anchor in. So I'm just going to turn that to a right angle, that little spiral, and then I'm going to push that through a gap, any gap I can find within those chips, and that anchors it in, and then bring it around back through the center somewhere. Just find another little gap. There's always a gap somewhere. Pull it all the way through near the edge, and then this can be a little bit of a setting round the outside of those little gem chips. Or equally, if you just had one bead at the center, it's another way of making a little upright nest for the bead to sit in. And once you've done that, just finish off with the end. Now I'm going to keep this end because I'm going to use the leftover of this end to wire the whole of this piece onto my ring shank. So there we are. I'm just turning that spiral flat down again. I'm just pushing all those wires and manipulating them a bit more so that they sit more firmly. You always have to spend a bit of time to work hard on everything, and things might misshape a bit. So then look at your ring and find the area that you don't mind covering up. I usually go for where the end of the wire is. I found a little gap in the ring here. So what I'm going to do is wire it on with that strong wire onto the shank. So I'm going to wrap it around, because this is quite nice firm wire, and it's been worked hard just by manipulating it. and then I will wrap it under the back of the orbital piece, and that will create a sort of solid, firm base, and it will sit firmly on my ring shank. So it's really as simple as that. You know, it's lots of manipulation, lots of hammering, which I hope you love as much as me. And hey presto, you've got one big statement orbital ring. So have fun making different versions of these. And you don't have to do the 2 rings. You could always just do 1 orbital ring and stop at that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll have many more ring tutorials for you very soon. So do check them out. Thank you for watching.